morning. Pete here, Rancho Coyote, FJ40 headquarters. Got a dilemma. Ran into a little interesting situation yesterday troubleshooting the knock on this 68. It's got the, looks like the original F engine in there. And it's going to run this by you guys out there in the community and see what you think. Get some opinions on what's going on here. Well, I rocked the crankshaft back and forth a little bit. Tried to look at the connecting rod caps and see if I could detect any, dwell area where the crankshaft was moving, but the rods weren't moving. Might detect a spun bearing or something like that. Kind of thought I saw something on the number 2, so I pulled that cap off, and as you'll see here in a little bit, the bearing wasn't spun. It was worn, but it wasn't spun. So I replaced that bearing with the brand new one. I measured the journal, and it's still 10 under. So put a new bearing on that one, and then moved to the number 1 cylinder. This happens really fast, so watch the ratchet when I start to turn it. There's still supposed to be full torque on that nut. Well, I don't know if you saw that. That nut wasn't even tight. It was cinched, maybe just beyond hand tight, but it didn't take any pressure to loosen that one. I'm going to replay it here a couple of times so you can see that ratchet movement. You can tell there's no torque. And then I'll show it here in slow motion too. We're on to something here. Well, that bearing looks brand new. I don't know what the deal is there, but that looks beautiful. I'm gonna have to measure the crank pin dimensions. All right, let's see if I can bring this down. Actually, I can go up first a little bit. Get that piston up higher in the cylinder. Get this down here where I can get my mic on it. See what this other bearing looks like. Those bearings look amazing compared to the number 2. The number 2 might have been the one that was knocking. Let's see what we got here. There's no vernier scale on this, so it's 2.116. So that journal can be as small as 2.1157. I'm getting 2.116 plus on the micrometer. Since I don't have a vernier on this one, let me see, look at it again. It's pretty much dead on 116, so it can be down to 115.7, so it's within tolerance. I'm popping this bearing out right now to make sure it's an oversize. It looks like the same part number as the new bearing that I have. Interestingly, it's a different part number from the number 2 bearing I changed or took out. To do some detective work and figure it out. I don't know if I can make this visible on this camera where it's sitting, but try some different angles here. This is the bearing I took out of number 2. Trying to move it around in the reflection, see if it'll pick up the scratch marks in there. And this is a part number, well, it says 010 right on it. 7971 22JU88 RB20. That says 010 right on it. That bearing I just took out of number 1 said minus 0.25. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe I have to do a conversion. What's 0.25 millimeter? I don't know if that's 010. The bearings that I'm putting in are these. Let's say 010 minus 010 on the box, but on the bearing it's got that same minus 0.25 TDC. This one doesn't say minus, just says 0.25 R9301. That's what's on the bearing. You saw what's on the box. So the box should be 10 under. So bearing that's in number 1 looks perfect. The bearing that was in number 2 looked all scorched up, and it's a different part number from the bearing that's in number 1. So these weren't all obviously put in at the same time. So somebody's been in here before me, is my quick conclusion here. So now I gotta look at a third one, maybe look at number 3 and see what that one looks like. Oh, here I'm just putting the number 1 bearing back on and just snugging the nuts up. Just to put a little torque on them, but they're not final torque yet. Here I'm starting to work on number 3. Checking the torque on these before I loosen them. Oh, those are fine. Number 2, when I took it off, seemed tight. Number 1, one of the nuts was not torqued. Oh boy. I don't think either one of the nuts on number 1 are torqued. They weren't that tight. Well, another scratched up one. I guess we're gonna do all 6. Journal's got little scratches. Yeah, be careful I don't push that top ring out on top of the cylinder, or I'll be pulling the head. I'll wind that tang up, and I knew I should have taken that dipstick out. Lazy. I don't want to climb out. Okay, tang's in. Bearing. Push it all the way in. Don't push the piston up too far. Alright, new bearing in. That's pretty snug, just almost exactly the same as the other one. I went ahead and replaced 3 through 6 bearings, both halves. All of those were torqued, the full torque. When I loosened them up, all the bearings looked roughly the same. And here's a picture of what they look like. And then, so I got all those done. But in the meantime, I had put number 1 rod cap back on and torqued it. Got both bolts torqued to the minimum 45. And then I went ahead and did the other 4 bearings. And then I'm laying there thinking underneath this thing, well, I might as well put that last bearing in. So I pulled number 1 off again, took the bearing out that was in there, even though it looks brand new. That doesn't even look like it's been run. And put the new bearing in. So now all 6 cylinders had the same bearing, and they're all 10 over, 10 under, and we're good to go. So I went to tighten and torque the rod cap now a second time on number 1. And the bolt that was loose the first time would not torque up. The other bolt would torque up, but the one that was loose when I first took it apart wouldn't torque up, and I kept adding more torque, not more torque, but I kept tightening and tightening and tightening, and I could tell it was, the bolt was either stretching or stripping or something else was going on. And anyway, I was like, I'm going to tighten this thing. I'm going to turn it until it either snaps or strips out or whatever. So I just kept going, another turn or two, and pretty soon I was well past the cotter pin hole. So I reached up above the crankshaft, above the bearing, where I could put my fingers on the head end of the rod bolts. And one of them felt like it had a dent in it, like it was pulling out through the head of the bolt. The other side felt nice and smooth and normal. So okay, I got to pull that bolt out. So I got the bolt out, and here's what the bolt looks like. You can see it was actually pulling through, separating from the head of the bolt as I tried to tighten it up. Okay, so that's all the evidence that I have, I think. So probably digging way too deep in this. I just need to fix it, but I kind of like to figure things out like this. So I don't know if you guys have any suggestions, any ideas. So that's my theory, is they replaced that one bearing. God, I don't think they would have buttoned it up if they couldn't get it to hold torque. Or maybe they could. Maybe they went to torque it up and it was stretching, so they just called it quits, put the pan back on, and said that, deal with it some other time. Because honestly, that bearing, you can see in the pictures, it doesn't look like it's ever been run. There's not any scratches on it or anything. So maybe they just called it quits and never started it. Or maybe they did start it and it started knocking again, so then they parked it. I don't know. Those are my theories. I'd love to hear your theories on that. In the meantime, I'm getting a new rod bolt, or two new rod bolts probably, and then put the new bearings all back in there, and then put the oil pan back on and see what it does. All right. Well, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear some theories if you have ever experienced anything like this, or what your ideas are. All right. Thanks, and we'll catch you soon next time. All right, bye.